So anyway, let's move on to the teaching moment and get a grip. Of course, we're going to be talking about grips. And before we get into why we're talking about grips, I'm going to bust Larry because he gave me a big headache a year ago and my head still hurts. So, as most of you know, when you listen to me talk, we're talking about the pitching motion and the everything due to anatomy and the way the body moves. And years ago, when data started showing up, when baseball pitching became data driven, and then everyone was having statistics, and then you listen to a baseball game and you think you're listening to a statistics class, I really resisted even wanting to deal with that because number one, I felt like it was out of my lane and I like to stay in my lane. But number two, I didn't have any immediate way where I could connect it back to the work I do, which is if I see a problem in a pitcher's motion that I'm able to correct it. So a year ago, so I have been resisting this, and trust me, companies call me all the time. Do you want this equipment? Do you want that? And gimmicks and stuff. And I'm more of a on hands, real, change it the real way. And also, don't bring numbers into my session, please. That's the main thing. The only number I pay attention in my session is how many pitches the pitcher's throwing. So a year ago, Larry calls me up and he says, he starts talking to me about data and he's telling me about this most interesting ball that he had. And it's a ball called Pitch Logic and it's put out by F as in Frank 5 Sports. And by the way, Larry and I have no connection to this company in any way financial. We're not on the board of directors. But he called me up and said, Angel, there's this ball and has a little computer in it and it gives you this reading. And I went, no, 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 I don't want to hear about spin rate. Don't talk to me. Well, he didn't leave me alone. But the thing is, you can't unhear what you hear. And as somebody who is passionate about my work, I'm like, oh, and it was right before Christmas. So I'm walking around the house. I can't stop thinking, now, should I have this ball? I mean, should I even look at this ball? What should I do? So then I call him again. I go, tell me again about the ball. So anyway, the cool thing about this ball is it's completely affordable. You don't have to install anything. You just, put the ball against your phone, which has an app on it, and boom, it's ready to go. The pitcher throws the ball, the catcher catches it, you retrieve the ball. It can't be hit, of course. And all these numbers pop up on your screen. So Larry's telling me about this, and I couldn't unhear it. Plus, I noticed my own stubbornness. So I went and got the ball. And then when I looked at it, I went, no, no, no. So I put the ball away. So then finally I confessed to Larry. I go, okay, I got to figure out a way where I can help. Where if you get something crazy on the screen, like some spin rate that's really wrong, or the type of spin is really wrong, that you don't just like, it's not doomsday for the pitcher. You like look at it as a tool to say, what I'm seeing is what I'm seeing on the screen. And then I want to be a part of how do you fix it. So I've been in conversation with Larry over the last year about how to fix what we see on the screen. Now we know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Larry, in the major leagues, they're taking all their great pitchers and the numbers they're getting about the pitcher's different pitches are actually being used not necessarily, oh, something's wrong, but more like this is what he does. And so this is how we should strategize which pitches he uses. Am I correct about that?
Right. I wouldn't say that improvement or trying to improve something doesn't go on. I would imagine that that does, but for sure, if they do something that they feel can help them and they get feedback from the ball or they get data that they think can help them, they're going to use it. If the pretty easy one is you got a high spin rate, we'll pitch in the top of the strike zone, you get a low spin rate, you sink it, then throw the ball down the strike zone. I mean, that's the general consensus. But I wouldn't say it's absolute and across the board. But I would say that yes, they do want to take what you have and then use what you have to your advantage. I don't know how much they're looking at trying to improve things, but it can be done, and I know that it has been done to do that or to make things consistent, like an arm slot.
Yes. So they're using information for strategic purposes. But what's happening and you may or may not know this because you're with the in the college world, but what's happening is people are, coaches are. In fact, I just got a call yesterday and they asked me about a popular system and they said, "Well, what do you know about this?" And I said, and I told them my story. And the thing is everybody now wants to know about these numbers. And you can't help but wanting to know because when you listen to a game, it's all you hear. And if one place has it, then someone else feels they have it. So you go into facilities now, and some pitching coaches use it. They're using it in instruction. And, sometimes people are very comfortable with numbers, particularly if you're not working in a modality like I am, which is to change the way the body moves. Okay. So here, what's happening now, and this is why I became so obsessed with this, is pitchers were calling me, fathers were calling me saying, I want to bring my son in. My son's spin rate was not high enough on his four seam. And so, when we went to the showcase, I'm getting stories like that. And then I'm also getting kids saying, hey, do you know what my spin rate is? Or this coach told me my spin rate was really good. And so it is part of the normal conversation now. However, I never want to go completely to the other side because the one session I brought it in to experiment with it, it was a crazy session for me because as an artist, I wasn't able to do creative work when I was busy looking at numbers. It was really a challenge. But then over the sessions, I started realizing that it can be an interesting tool that I use, especially with some of my better pitchers. And so it is a wonderful tool to have. And what I love most about this company, in addition to the fact that they have the best customer service in the world, their guys are there and they're great, is that it's affordable. So knowing that everybody's getting into this equipment thing and knowing that everybody's getting into the data thing, I started thinking, well, if we're measuring spin, and if we're measuring, obviously there's velocity coming up, but spin's the thing. If we're mentioning spin, and if they're giving spin rates the grade of it's good or bad, that is, coaches are looking at it and the brain is of the coach is making a judgment of it. Oh, this spin is good. Oh, this spin is bad. If that is happening, then we need to understand. This is what I said, I need to reverse engineer. Well, if his spin isn't quote unquote correct for what he's supposed to be throwing, and we all know without being physicists, we know there's different spins and the spins are different between pitches, and you want to have that spin because you're trying to deceive the hitter. Plus, the spin is going to create something to do with how fast or the placement of that ball. So that spin is having an effect, and it's the last thing you apply to the ball. It's having an effect on where the ball lands. And we have to go back to the beginning. What are we trying to do? You're trying to throw a ball that he either doesn't swing at, but it's in the strike zone, or he swings at and misses because it was thrown so well or so confusing in a way that he didn't, he swung incorrectly. Those are the objectives. So I reversed it to, okay, well, I want to understand the actual fingers and the hand and the wrist even more on the grip, because if there is something you see that's wrong, you can't just say, oh, well, this isn't good. The kid's looking at you like, well, can we fix this? And we all have been doing this without data, right, Larry? We all have been looking at the strike zone going, we didn't like that pitch,
Correct.
or that pitch was too slow, or that pitch went over the catcher's head. We all have been making those evaluations. And so the tool, the data kind of confirms it. But if you think of it as a confirming thing, like another set of eyes that says, yep, and then you can start to work with some of the things that are personal to the pitcher, which is his wrist, his hand, making sure he's doing everything right. Then you can start to see if what you're doing is not only affecting some of the numbers you're looking at, but also it makes that data stuff tangible. And if the world wasn't going in that direction, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But since the world is, we need to have this conversation so we bring it more home so pitchers aren't feeling like this is some disease they've been diagnosed with and then they're stuck with it. So, my intention is to talk a little bit about the kinds of things a coach can look at and understand about the way the ball leaves the hand that is going to have an effect on the kinds of things that you guys want, which is the spin, the direction, the velocity, the location, etc. Does that make sense, Larry?
Absolutely, for sure. Can I hit on one thing real quick? You went
Yes.
back. You said we were trying to throw the ball where either they won't swing at it or they'll swing and miss. I'll add, or I want them to hit it. I just don't want them to hit it
Right.
hard. You're looking for soft contact. You're not completely avoiding contact altogether. I want them to put the ball in play. But point well
Yes.
taken. I just wanted to throw that in there.
No, that's important. No, yeah, no, it is important, and, that's why you're the baseball guy that I have on hand, because from the perspective I'm at, I'm looking at this is what we want, on a performance level, but that's baseball stuff. You want the ball in play. You want to pitch to contact once in a while, or to have that be, and that's totally no. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I expect you to do that for me, and I appreciate that. So, yeah. So anyway, in either case, we want to make sure that we're in control and the hitter isn't, that ball is thrown in a way that can create one of those scenarios. So when I started, so I've of course talked about the wrist and the fingers before, but there's some very cool things in doing research. So there's researchers out there that are looking at the fingers, and they're looking at very specific ways the fingers move off the ball, and it's insane. And I tell you, you do not want to run and do this. Doing scientific research on the fingers and on the biomechanics of the way each knuckle works is absolutely insane. And it's why my head hurts. But what's so cool is when you really get this, you can go to a pitcher's hand, and the first thing you want to do, now let's say we're talking about a pitcher who's got good mechanics. So let's talk about the role of the mechanics with the hand. Okay. The reason why we have to be sure that the mechanics are correct. So let's talk about the speed of the ball. If when you come out of the glove with the ball, and the ball goes down and it goes out and it goes behind you towards the outfield, that ball is really not got a lot of energy to it. Your body is getting it in position so that it can then get to the hand and you can do what you need to do with it. But basically, that ball is just in your hand and it's just storing up and kind of waiting for the moment. When your front foot lands and you start to turn, now we've got energy that is moving up through the body of the guy holding the ball. And he's rotating and spinning and getting all his body into motion. So when he finally faces his target, the shoulder imparts speed to the wrist, and the hand is controlled by the wrist. And the fingers are going to control that last moment of when the ball leaves the hand. So when we are talking about releasing a ball at all, and we know that no matter what kind of spin you want or what kind of pitch you're throwing, you have to get energy from your shoulder to your wrist, and it passes through the elbow. And the wrist in science imparts about 21% of the velocity to the total velocity of the pitch. So it's important. So we want the wrist getting energy. So if you've got someone who, when you look at them, because to look at a grip is important, but the grip plus the way the pitcher's moving is critical. So if you're looking at someone who's doing something strange with his shoulder, or his arm is flying way up in the air, it's coming out of that compact position that we want to see pitchers do, you absolutely have to address that, because you can talk about spin all day and you can talk about location all day. But let's remember, and this isn't a show about the delivery, but I just want to point out that when you're starting to work with the hand and with the pitches, if this is somebody who, when you look at them, they're doing something odd at the level of the shoulder, that velocity or the positioning of the hand is going to change, because the position of the hand, and as you know, we want everything to come through looking like a fastball. That's a very comfortable, straight on position of the wrist. And if you don't get all the energy to that normal wrist position prior to when the wrist and hand start to change their shape because of the pitch, you're never going to have a grip or data show up on a ball or on a screen or whatever that's going to be okay. So I just wanted to get that in there. You've got to be sure that the shoulder is bringing the hand into the release point in a specific way. And so everything I'm going to talk about is assuming that you have a pitcher who's not one leading with the elbow, which changes the entire lower arm position, or that he's not using his shoulder correctly, or his delivery just looks completely off. This is kind of a moment, Larry, where I would say don't even give him the ball to throw with, don't even measure him because you got to deal with the delivery first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and when the delivery's off, the data's gonna be off too. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about it. It's all kinda consistent. So I'm always gonna be in the department of teaching coaches how to deal with the delivery and the motion, but the way I'm looking at this for me right now, again, to make sure I'm staying in my lane, is that the wrist and the hand are part of the anatomy. So just as I teach you about what the shoulder should do and what the elbow should do, now we're going to talk about what the hand needs to do and where the pitcher can lose his grip on the ball that then makes nothing work correctly. So I think one of the most interesting things that I learned when I was really studying the fingers is that there's two places where the hand starts to have action against the ball. And there's a very critical path that the ball goes through that if you don't understand what's happening, you can quote unquote lose your grip. And because the body's moving so quickly, the most important thing, once I looked at everything, the most important thing I thought was, the place you start is making sure that the ball is in the hand and the way it started in the hand out of the glove, and that in the process of all the speed of the body, you didn't lose the force against the ball. Because if you don't have your grip against the ball in the way that you want it to when you go to release it, you're not going to be able to get the action or the pull against the seams or the things that we want to see that make the ball go through the air in the way that we want a pitcher's ball to go through the air. So now I said this before on one show a long time ago, and it's so important. So when the pitcher rotates, and he starts to face the plate. The ball is in his hand, and this is called max external rotation. And it's if you're looking from the catcher view, it's when the shoulder is externally rotating so much. So in a really good pitcher, you'll see the forearm is parallel to the ground. The ball is in the hand and it's facing the sky. And then that place there is the place where it's the first time the hand is really under the ball, but the ball has to stay in the correct position in the fingers. Now, what's happening here is the speed is so great when he arrives in that position. And the next movement is he's going to start accelerating the ball, that the ball has to, the grip of the ball exerts the greatest amount of pressure at that moment. When they look at pressure coming out of the glove all the way through the motion, there is equivalent to like 45 pounds of pressure against that ball.
Your fingers against the ball?
Yes, there's pressure in your hand. So the hand is the palm and the fingers, and there's like 45 pounds of pressure. Of course, science calls it Newton meters, but I changed this for everyone. There's like 45 pounds of pressure that hand has to have against the ball. In other words, what happens when the ball is released as the hand comes forward? So let me say this first, is the ball is going to roll up from the lowest part of the hands. It rolls up because your fingers are pulling down. Does that make sense, Larry?
Absolutely.
The ball rolls up because your fingers are pulling down. And anybody listening to this, I mean, having a baseball in your hand and just putting it in your non-dominant hand and putting your palm against it and pulling the fingers downward, you'll see that the ball is rolling up but the hand is pulling it down. That's why the ball's rolling up. But you've got to understand that. So we've got a rolling ball situation. So when you're in the back position, you're in max external, and this is all happening in milliseconds now. The ball arrives there, and the next thing, you're coming through the acceleration path where now the ball, if you're not gripping it, would fall straight down to the ground. And you get that, right, Larry? Is that
Correct.
making
Yep,
sense?
for sure.
So you've got to grip that ball. So when you go through that, you're still hanging on to it until you go forward to the release point, at which point you pull and the ball rolls up, right? So, one of the biggest problems is premature ball rolling. And this happens in kids, especially, but it happened and the problem with it is during that process, and I'm not even going to go into the details of the knuckles and which joint does what. So we started this talking about spin. Okay. The ball has to stay in the air. So we have to impart spin on it. And the spin we're imparting is helping it get through the air. It's going to tell us when it's going to arrive and how it's going to arrive. Okay. All the crazy spin for different pitches. The only way you get spin is to have friction with the fingertips on the seams. So what does that mean? So we know the pitcher puts his fingers hopefully correctly on the seams in the glove, right? But when he moves through that motion and he gets to that backward position where we know because of forces that are happening in the motion, and this is all physics and complicated, but we know when he swings that ball around and gets it behind him, if he's not gripping it or he loses that ball starts moving, meaning his fingers started changing. And by the time he gets to the release point, he doesn't have that same friction capability on the seams. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So it's a way of saying the ball moved in your hand before it was supposed to,
What would cause that?
not having a firm enough grip at the right time.
Okay.
Now, what any human does is so if you have a gallon of water in your hand in front of you, you're gripping it a certain way. If I say, hey, throw that backwards to me, you're going to naturally grip it tighter as you get to the top and then you're going to let it go. It's not like we have to tell people, hey, if you're reaching behind you or you have something round in your hand and you're moving it through space, there's going to be moments when you're going to grip it tighter. This is also part of research. I mean, they've done research on the messaging that goes on between the hand and the brain during a pitch. I mean, it's incredible.
I want to see some of this stuff.
Well, you know what? But think about it. Of course, your brain is controlling everything. So when you go to pick up that gallon of water, you pick it up with just the right amount of force, right?
Right.
And if right next to it is a glass of water, you pick that up with the right amount of force, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And if I say, oh, throw this piece of paper into the garbage can, you know just how to throw it. It may or may not make the basket, but you do it. But if I'm giving you a brick and say, throw that into it, you're going to throw it. These are command centers in the brain that are picking up what you're doing because you don't realize it, but you've told your brain, hey, brain, I'm going to throw a brick now. Hey, brain, I'm going to throw a paper. It's picking up the sensation from your eyes seeing what you're picking up. The inside of the body, the more you study it, it's so complicated, but it's so cool. We are very cool. Our bodies, our brains are very cool. So he's got this round thing in his hand. It's safe in the glove. He's coming out. He's moving horizontally behind him. He's got to get a grip on the ball so it doesn't fall out of his hand. Then his arm's turning over, and now he's behind him. And so the grip on the ball has to be maintained, meaning the fingertips and the thumb position and everything have to be solid to where he can hold on to the grip. And this is why you guys know this on some innate level because whoever was the first pitcher that moved his thumb underneath or on the side or his finger over here or said, let's turn the seam this way. I mean, I don't know how that was designed. A bunch of guys drinking beer, playing with a baseball. I don't know. Who's the
Very
first one
likely.
who's the first one that said, hey, if I do this, it does this. I mean, I don't know how, but you guys intuitively know it. I mean, you already know this stuff. The thing is, we don't want a change. We don't want a change in that position of the ball. And what happens is we get a change in the position of the ball will roll up too soon. And that when you see a pitch go straight out of the hands, up in the air, over the catcher's head, I mean, it's like, whoa, he did not time the wrist and the finger pull at the right time. So he didn't pull against it. He didn't, if he doesn't pull against it with the right wrist action, then the ball won't go downward. Does that make sense?
Correct.
So if you throw a ball in the air, I don't want to say a volleyball because I don't want to talk about another sport. But if you just threw the baseball up in the air in front of you and smacked it forward with the palm of your hand, it's just going to go a certain way because you didn't flex your wrist over the top of it. Flexion is when you take your wrist and you bring your fingers towards your forearm. That's wrist flexion. So your palms away from you, you bring the fingers down. That's flexion. You either didn't do that, and when you're doing that, that's how you get to pull. The wrist pulls the fingertips down. So everyone, put your hand in the air, flex your wrist, pretend you're grabbing on or scraping on a wall is a good example. When you're scraping on a wall, if you just pull straight down with the fingertips, you're just putting finger marks on the wall. If you use your wrist as you're pulling down, now you're getting the pulling and the friction from the fingers. Does that make sense? So it's a timing of the wrist and fingertips. If that ball isn't in the hand in the way that you've got a good grip on it, so you have about 44 pounds of pressure on that ball when it's in the max external rotation position. Because guess why? Your brain knows you're about to throw it hard. To throw it hard, you better go from a good hold and then out the hand. You don't want to have a sloppy hold and then your hand's trying to find it. There's about 18 pounds of pressure that the fingers are applying to the ball. Now, as you're going through the air, the ball's pushing against your hand's pushing against it. We know this is physics. You know, you're standing up, the ground's pushing against you, you're pushing against the ground. It's how you stand. You want to jump high, you push against the ground, you lower yourself, you push up. This is like, it's a law of physics. So that ball is pushing against you, and then that forces the hand to push forward, and that's how the ball comes out of the hand. So the fingertips against the seams, and here we're back to spin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the fingertips have to be on the seams. They have to be exactly where you want them. That ball has to be held in the hand in an appropriate way to allow for whatever pitch you want, whatever velocity you want. But the main thing is that you, the pitcher, you, the coach, when you know the perfect grip and you know what you want him to do and you want his fingers in a certain way, the first thing you have to get is he hanging on to the ball so that when he gets to acceleration and release, he can actually do what he wants with that ball. It's not moving out of his hand sooner than he wanted. So we know we got to have some force back there, right?
Yes,
But we
absolutely.
also have to have correct finger positions.
Very much so. And the thing I think about when you talk like that, I just think, I mean, that to me, the teach would be, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to say it. It will feel like you're letting go of the ball about eyebrow level. Throw the ball as late as you can. Throw 100% of the pitch. Usually, when guys try to do too much, throw too hard, they miss up because they let go of the ball too soon. They're trying to overdo it. Usually, because they're, generically speaking, they spin off the ball or they run away from the pitch. They let go of the ball too soon.
Right.
You want the ball in your hand as long as you can hold it in your hand, in my opinion.
Yes.
But you also don't want to hold it. If you hold it too long, you'll spike the hell out of it. You'll throw it
Yes.
straight to the ground. So it's an innate. It's just and that's more of a. To me, we talk about like that's more feel. It's just a. It's just a really tough thing to describe. But a guy's ability to just have good enough feel, where and usually guys with good feel then have good control and good command. The better feel they have because they have an innate ability to kind of know when to let go of the baseball and how to manipulate and spin the ball. But the teach for me would be, yeah, you just throw it as late as you can. It's going to feel, you don't literally, I don't believe, let go of the ball in front of your face. Because if you did, you would throw it straight into the ground. But that, to me, that's the feel or that's the teach. If the guy is, a kid is, missing high all the time, exceptionally high, or letting go of the ball too soon, or the grip, or it could be a grip issue. I don't know. That's just the way I think of it.
Well, he's letting go of the ball too soon. If the ball position in his palm is such that it has to release sooner because he can't hold on to it. And we're going to talk about that in a second when we look at a photo. That's the first thing. But secondly, if he isn't positioned with his fingers in a strength position for his wrist, because the ball can't go anywhere unless the wrist moves it somewhere. If you notice when I asked you to hold your hand out in front and flex, that hand goes downward, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So it because of the position of the arm, it's going and we want downward trajectory. That's why the pitcher's on a hill. So you want him to hang on to the ball to do what he can do at the end of it to at the release point. Yes, he's got to hang on to it. And so, therefore, the grip has to be allowing him to get a good grip on it in the back, hang on to it until he moves the fingers. And yes, for some pitchers, this is probably intuitive. It may be the shape of their hand, they can hang on to it. But for pitchers, when you see a ball go awry, he did not roll through the ball, you move the ball through his hand in the correct way. So somewhere he lost something. And it's just like when I see a pitcher do something crazy with the ball, I'll look at him, I'll go, what happened? You go, it slipped out of my hand, which is what you're saying. The ball can't slip out of the hand. It has to be put to a certain place so your wrist and fingers can act on it. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Yeah, so the wrist and fingers have to act on it. And by the way, you're right. If your ball is too close to your head, you can't act on the ball in the same way as if your hand is reaching out front. That's why when in science we talk about velocity and we talk about a successful pitch, we want the good spin, friction from the seams, and we want you releasing. If you want velocity, you got to have good spin and you got to reach out in front far enough, not only so you're releasing the ball closer to the plate, but so your wrist and hand can do what it wants. If it's real close to you and right up over your head, you can't pull against it. You're pulling down on it, but you're not able to use the wrist to go over the ball and pull it at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
See, so it's all what you're saying. But when you see that, you have to kind of in your head go, this guy's wrist is weird. He's doing something weird with his wrist. If the ball is flying out of the hand, he's doing something weird with the wrist. If the ball rolls up too soon, he lost his grip. So there are connections you can make and these are tools. So when you have to really go deeper with someone, but to understand what's actually happening is so important. So does all that make sense?
For sure.
Okay, so to all my listeners, we're going to be looking at some photos here, and you can go to Angel Borrelli pitching on YouTube, and you can not only listen to the podcast there, but if you're listening in the car and you want to see these photos, just go there and then look at the teaching moment, and you'll see the visuals that we're using. But for Larry, for you, go ahead and open up that photo number 1, which is Larry, who, by the way, you do know he's a lefty, so you're going to see this lefty grip. So he's doing his little four-seam grip here.
Got it.
Yes. So Larry's doing something really smart. So according to research, the further apart the fingers are, the slower the ball is going to go. And so you guys already know this because if you wanted to throw a slower fastball, you would do something with your finger position. But every time you change your fingers, you're changing the range of motion of the wrist. And the wrist has to be right behind the ball, no matter what you're throwing. But if you change the position of the fingers, it changes how fast the wrist can flex or how slow it's going to flex. And sometimes it affects its range of motion. You guys know this because when you change your grip, you're moving the fingers around and you're moving the thumb around and you already know this. You just don't know that the reason why it's doing that is because of the wrist. So once we know that, and he's throwing a four seam here, And I know you wanted it to go really fast, right? So he's got the optimal position. He's got the two fingers on top and he's got the thumb right under the ball. And you see his wrist, how perfectly positioned it is behind the ball. So when he releases, if he brought that ball back right now, just in the position he's in, you'd see that as he came forward into the flexion, the wrist is controlling it so that the fingers are going to pull straight down on the seams and he's going to pull those fingers backward. And then he's going to have perfect backspin, which is your velocity backspin, right? Am
Correct.
I right
Yeah,
about
the
that?
backspin. Yep.
Yeah. And that thumb is so important because it is the thumb being all the way, the thumb has many actions that it does, and it's the strongest finger on the hand. And if you've ever had a thumb injury, you know that you can't grasp anything. With the thumb all the way under, it's actually putting it into an action, a joint action that's actually stabilizing that ball. And on research they're doing about location issues, which location issues usually stem from this back position I told you about, the max external. Remember, if you reverse engineer the ball release, your ball release is out in front. You take your arm all the way back, put it back where it was in max external rotation. You want that ball to go from there out, right? You don't want it to swing around or do whatever. You want a straight line. The thumb, some researchers are saying, and they're saying that more research has to be done, but it makes so sense to me because I understand the body, that the thumb position and the work of the thumb is what's controlling the ball and controlling probably your location, because if the thumb starts to move, the wrist gets wobbly, and then when you go to pull, and remember the wrist is moving as you're pulling, then you're not going to have the right pull, which in your case you want it even, right?
Yes, very.
Yes. So if that thumb wasn't allowing that from the max external to this, you'd be in trouble. So are thumbs important? Yes, they're very important. So what you've got here is a perfect position. And when I have a pitcher who has a weird thing going on with this four seam, I used to just say, "Show me your four seam," and then I looked to see. Yeah, I would make him flex and extend real fast with the ball in the hand, and I could tell by the way his wrist was moving as if he had his fingers in the optimal position, and most of the time, it was the thumb that was throwing off the way the wrist was working. If the wrist can't flex up and down consistently in the same plane, you're doing something with your fingers. Now, we're talking about a four seam because on other things you do want that, right? But on this one, you don't want that. And we're going to kind of talk mostly about the four seam because, when you guys say in baseball, oh, you start with the four seam, that's what you teach and everything comes off of that. Well, a pitcher, if he can understand the pressure needed, the wrist action needed, the positioning needed, he probably is going to learn everything else even better. So even on a kinesiological sense, this is the pitch they have to master. And kids who have trouble with this, when they come to me and they say, I can't, my four seems awful. Well, I know that every other thing they're doing is probably on sand. It's not on a good, strong foundation. So, what I love about this is just it's so perfect. And by the way, Larry sent these to me randomly when I told him what I was going to be talking about. We didn't move his fingers around to make him look good.
Yep, that's it.
This is him. Yeah. So now listen, one thing I want to say, so this is a little tip. So notice you see his middle finger and you see his index finger is shorter, right? But because of the size of his hand, he's still got good positioning. So you see how his knuckles are sticking up in the air? You can see his fingernail. Okay, his knuckles are up. When he pulls on that ball, that knuckle right there, the first one, is going to straighten out, correct?
Mhm.
You're rolling, it's gonna straighten out. So, the more contact he has with the seams, the longer the contact with the seams, the greater that pull is going to be. But by the way, he can't make that pull until the what moves? The wrist. Okay, so remember the wrist and when you've got that wrist locked in like that with that long finger, you're going to have really good direction. Cuz remember, the wrist is going to give help with the direction because your fingers are stemming from it. Now, here's a little tip for those of you who work with the little guys. So if you take that ball, so most times you look at a four seam grip on a youth pitcher and he's going to have his fingers, his index finger may not make it to the seam. So he's either pulling that middle finger back and then the index finger is on a smooth part. So if you take that ball, see where it says Rawlings on the side? If you take it and flip it to where the wide side of the horseshoe is towards the middle finger, it's still a four seam grip. But the narrow, see how the horseshoe sideways and it goes narrow? Remember, the horseshoe has different shapes. If you flip it the other way, the narrow part ends up by the index finger, so it's closer to the index finger, so he can get his fingers on the seam. See how the biggest part of the horseshoe is towards the shortest part of the index finger? It doesn't change anything, Larry. It just gives the index finger contact with the seam the way you're doing it. So that's a little tip for those of you who work with kids. Now, does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a little thing a lot of times, in fact, Larry, this has been what I think started this when a pitcher's hand is too small. How do you deal with that? Well, first manipulate the ball a little bit. Still with the grip you want, guys. I'm not telling you how to do different grips or whatever, but all you did is take the object and you turned it so now the horseshoe's facing, so it's still the horizontal horseshoe, but now the index finger can get on a seam.
All right. Now I have a question. When you say the fingertips on the seam, what's comfortable to me and what I think is the best way to do it, but I could be wrong, is I like the top two knuckles. I like the seam to sit in the top two knuckles. Is that why you mean? Is that what you mean by the fingertip pulling on the seam?
Yes.
Or okay, because I don't want that to be confused by the finger pads, the top finger pads on the seam. I would almost prefer the joints, the top two knuckles or the top two joints of my fingers in the seam sitting in that, as opposed to the finger pad sitting on the seam.
Yeah, no, no, no. Well, first of all, on the index finger, that's why I said you change it. But yeah,
Yep.
so guys, so the knuckles are the joints, and the joints move to pull the body part. Now, if you look at your hand and look at all your knuckles on your palm, not we're not talking about these knuckles on the fingers now. Make a fist and eat all these knuckles. That joint that's right there between the fingers and those knuckles is one of the most important joints in pitching. And it's the joint that moves first to uncouple the ball from the hand so the ball gets far enough away so you can pull with the fingertips. Okay. And yes, this is what I was just getting into saying. When you look at four seam grips, you're going to see guys. In fact, I think I said this to you the other day guys who have the seam under the knuckle. So when the knuckle straightens, and that causes the pulling of the pad. The knuckle can't pull the pad, the tissue rubs against the pad. The knuckles moving the tip down, right. If he's on the seams, he barely is getting that knuckle over it. When he pulls, he's pulling on the smooth part. Okay. So the tip to be in touch right over the edge. So, yes, and that's a better way to say it, Larry. So I'm glad you brought that up. The tip has to pull across the seam for as long as possible, and my better pitchers, they get right up over it so that when that knuckle starts to move, the seam is then presented to the pad. That's why if you change the horseshoe shape, the index finger has more of the same that the middle finger is going to have. Can you see how the difference of positioning is? But it's not really, actually yours is perfect, so you don't need to do that. But for your little kids, when you're looking at joint problems, that's what you want to look at. Now, if Larry took his thumb and moved it up the side of that pitch, he's going to reduce his velocity because that spin isn't going to be as directed, and he's changing the way the wrist is going to work. So he's going to have some probably different type of movement on it. So the thumb under the middle gives it that direct relationship. And now you've got the middle finger and the thumb supporting that wrist. And now the wrist velocity can impart itself into the fingers, which pull backward. Does that make sense? So that thumb
Hmm.
position is perfect. So what you see with little kids, because if you grab a ball and you put the thumb under the middle, you might go, whoa, that's a real stretch for that thumb. But you have to do it. The thumb actually does that action. It's like if you put your thumb inside your palm. It actually does that. In fact, by the way, Olympic power lifters, when we are trying to get a good grasp on the bar so it doesn't move in, the bar is moving in space pretty fast on Olympic lift. The grasp is you put your thumb under your fingers like that on the bar. You are actually using a thumb inside the grip grasp on the bar, and it controls the wrist. So what you're getting here is optimum control. So when you've got a four seam, a pitcher throwing a four seam, and you don't know what the heck's wrong, but it doesn't look right, have him hold it out and try his thumb. Every pitcher, and also the fingers being close together. Because remember, if the fingers the further apart, you're going to get a little less velocity if you have the thumb up the side. So by bringing everything in alignment like this, then you get the wrist to act correctly, which makes the fingers act correctly. So remember this: wrist motion controls finger motion. Wrist motion controls finger motion. If you remember that, then you can take a look at where the thumb is, the fingers are, and then you start with that. It makes magical changes.
Awesome. Good stuff. I was kind of tinkering around too. Had my hand in front of my face. And when I stick my thumb underneath my fingers, my wrist, it hinges, it works pretty good. Stick your thumb directly, point it straight out or to the inside of your body, point it to the direction of your index finger, and it doesn't move as clean.
Yes, it's huge. Clean. Love that word, clean. This is clean, guys, and this is based on, so I'm going to remind everyone, I'm not trying to be a pitching coach. I am being an analytical kinesiologist, which is what I am, analyzing how you get efficient movement through the hand, just like you get efficient movement when I talk about the way the hips work or the shoulder works. So this is so important. So let's get to the second picture here. We talked a little bit about the position in the hand. Now, Larry sent me this. This is from one of his youth pictures, and he knew something was wrong, and we didn't discuss it, but he already, I'm sure, knows this. So I wanted to confirm with Larry that this kid is, in fact, thinking he's throwing a four seam fastball. He's not like it's not got some other name. He's throwing a four seam. So is this grip here going to be efficient for him so that he can accomplish what he wants to accomplish with the forcing, which is the fastest and the straightest pitch. So this is the clean, pure, get it out there, get it fast, drill it right where you want to put it. So on this picture here, the problem he has, well, we were just talking about the thumb. So if we looked at this from the front, his thumb is probably to the side, but that's not the real issue yet. That ball is sitting so far back in his hand that ball, this is where you want to change up grip. You want the ball back closer in the hand, but the ball is so far back in his hands that the way it's going to come out of his hand is sooner than the way it needs to come out so the ball can do all the things it does, which is to roll up. It rolls up so you can pull down. Rolling up, pulling down, one big thing. When it's way back in the palm of the hand like that, that's not going to happen. Now, the other thing, and this is why you guys, whoever made up the change up, whatever amount of beer he was drinking that night, he figured out, hey, my wrist barely moves when it's in, it's like there's something different. There's a different range of motion, but the biggest thing is, and this is one of the things my advisor in graduate school told me. He said, "Angel, you know why the changeup moves slower?" I go, "Why?" And I was just a graduate student, not even really knowing pitching yet. And he goes, "Because the lever is shorter." So, guys, when the ball's in your fingertips, you're hitting your driver. When your ball's in the palm of your hand, you're using your putter. That's why your clubs are different lengths in golf, because its maximum distance is controlled by how that lever is, right?
Hmm.
Okay. So you don't dig dirt out of the ground with the spoon. You get a spoon with a longer handle. You do more, right?
Right.
Okay. Those are levers, lever mechanics. So the lever, see the wrist here? The lever now is much shorter from that to the end. That if that ball was way out there, then you've got a different lever length. So now you've got a different lever length between the ball and the joint and than the fastball. So what's wrong with this guy? And then if he gets the ball out there, Larry, my guess is his thumb. See where his thumb is stretched?
Mhm.
If you told him right now to move his thumb under, the ball would have to rotate. He's got no room in that joint because that joint now is doing a different action, and I don't wanna bore you with the names. You get the ball out in the fingertips, just picture it, frees up that smooth joint you're seeing there between the index and the thumb, and that thumb can move underneath because now the joint can go into a different action, which is what we would want for that thumb to be more underneath the ball. Could you get that?
For sure.
Yeah. So that's the interesting thing about that. Now, one more thing, one more photo before we close, because I have smoke coming out of my ears right now. Do you, Larry?
It's yeah, it's pretty deep. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is Larry's. Hey, Larry, am I going to be arrested for giving away your secret
No,
grips and
I'm long
everything?
gone. I'm
Okay.
long gone.
Okay.
Never was an issue anyway.
Oh, okay, Larry's changeup. This is what he throws, the way he throws his changeup. Okay, now this is something I would be out of my lane talking about this grip or whatever, so I'm going to keep it with all that we've talked about. So now he's using a two seam grip, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, when he sent me this, oh, and tell the world what this is called because I'd never heard of it, but I'm not a baseball person.
A fosh.
Okay, see, I never heard that word. I never heard that word.
I don't know why it's called that. You
Yes.
got to, circle change and pitchfork change, all these different variations, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. You're just killing velocity, so it's called a fosh.
Yes. So anyway, he spread his fingers apart to get slower,
Correct.
but his thumbs in the middle to get good direction.
Yep, and I choke, and you can't see it, but if you turn it to the side, the ball would be choked or deep in my grip, not in my palm, but it's deep in the grip. Mhm.
Deep in the grip. Okay, so we've got all the components we just talked about. So he's controlling his wrist speed with where the ball is in his hand. He's controlling direction, which the thumb not being off center. And then he's got the two seam grip on top with the fingers further apart. Now, here's another one of these little baseball tricks. So if you have a pitcher, and I couldn't believe it because I saw this grip on someone the other day, and most of my guys don't throw this changeup because I look at grips all day, but they don't throw this one. But anyway, I had somebody come in who was throwing this, and this is before I got the picture, and he was having trouble with it. The catcher, we weren't using the pitch logic ball, so I wasn't measuring speed. But the pitcher said, "Angel," and I wish I could remember everything he said. He said, it's got a good speed change, but it's not coming in and dropping the way you want, blah, blah, and he's giving me feedback. So, of course, the first thing I say, because by the way, his mechanics are good enough to where he's locating everything else. See, when you've got someone who's doing a good job, then one thing doesn't work, go to the grip. So he shows me his grip, and it looks exactly like this. So when Larry sent me this picture, I went, "Oh my God, it's that Fosh grip or whatever." But the horseshoe, so we've got the horseshoe facing down, okay? And so see the narrow part of the horseshoes up at the top? And what this pitcher did that was different is he had the ball more in his fingertips, so I told him to move it back. But he also he wanted that top finger on the seam more. But here's what we had. He had the horseshoe turned backwards towards your body, Larry. So the bottom of the horseshoe
Mm-hmm.
was in the middle.
Yep.
And so his fingers were way spread out over the seams, like way apart. And I said, "Is that comfortable?" He says, "Well, he says it's the way I throw it, but it doesn't do what I want it to do." So I said, "Let's turn the ball." So we turned it towards the position you're in, which brings the narrowness of the seams to the top. Now he's still doing what he wants. He wants his two fingers over the top of a two seam grip. But because the horseshoe part is more narrow, he could get them more over the seam. And because he was right on the seams, he was able to pull down for longer over that curve, the curve of the ball. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So now he's getting, what rules he following now? The time of the friction, pulling, the time of the contact with the seam, so that he can get even more friction. So cool, right?
Interesting. Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, and I always thought of just if fastball is out of my grip as far as I can hold it without losing control of it, fingers together, then what are the exact opposites of all those things? I'm going to spread my fingers. I'm going to get it deep in my grip. I'm going to, or take my two fingers or my power fingers, my index and middle finger off the ball, which then you deal with circle change and various type change ups. So yeah, that's how I think of it.
That no, and you know what? That's genius and it's fantastic. And I'm going to get letters saying, "Could Larry do the show, Angel? And maybe you could be the guest."
No.
So, no, it's total. No, it is total genius. And this is what I mean. I've always said this: you coaches are way smarter than you know, and you say things in an easy way. I hope that I can add more knowledge to confirm for you guys what you already knew, and sometimes maybe even give you an extra thing to look at or think about. So I love this. So